Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is Katie Colleen with Colleen Cosplay, and today I'll be showing you how to make a Supergirl crop top and skirt. So let's get started with the pattern. I'll be altering this simplicity bodysuit pattern. I also could highly recommend the Yaya Han's ultimate bodysuit pattern from McCalls. That one I felt was a lot simpler to follow and to make. But since I want to, of course, have diversity in my tutorials, I will be using the simplicity pattern for this, which is a little different. So I'll be using this blue stretch fabric. Do make sure that you have the stretch cut in the right way, because this is going to be very much fitted. It's just gonna go right on over your head, so make sure it has a lot of good stretch. I'm going to be using the bodysuit with sleeves, and I'm just going to be cutting out the top portion of it. Give yourself a whole lot of room and then you can trim it down later. So I'm cutting out all the pieces for the top of the bodysuit and both of the sleeve pieces. Now I've already done the applique for the Supergirl symbol. I did that as a speed sew, and I have loads of applique tutorials on my channel, so I will link those in the description. And I'm just going to move on with how I sewed the actual top. So for the top, I'm going to be sewing this side front piece to the front piece. And since this is a stretch fabric, I will be using a zigzag stitch. So then I'm also going to sew the side back to the back. I'm going to serge all of these seams. And this is just to cut off any extra rough edges of fabric and make it nice and smooth on those seams. Now I'm going to do a top stitch. This gives it a much more finished look, which I really enjoy. So I will be doing a top stitch all over all those seams that we just sewed with this top stitch right here. So this is actually a straight stitch that still has stretch to it, and I do really like how it looks. It's a lot thicker, more defined than a normal straight stitch. And then I'm just going to be top stitching on top. This means I will have the sewing machine foot with the inside edge on that seam, and this is going to keep that seam very flat. Now I'm going to move on to the sleeves, which are a bit tricky with this pattern. So to start out, I'm going to sew the dart at the top. So that is just this V shape. You're going to sew both sides of the V together. Now we have this really funky looking seam that we're going to sew together. So you can see here how the two halves will fit together. The hard part is when you put right sides together, getting it all to line up. So this is how it looks sewn together. You see how those corners have fit together. And for those sharp turns, I definitely had the sewing machine needle down to take those turns to kind of hold the fabric in place while I was repositioning the foot. So I'm going to start by doing this zigzag seam and then do the straight seam on the other side. So now we have the sleeves. As you can see, I'm modeling them individually. So I'm going to sew the side seams of the front to the back, both those side seams straight down, and I'm not top stitching these. And these sleeves are going to sew onto the front and the back. And then I can just sew that underarm seam around the sleeves. So now we have something that is wearable, and now it comes to fitting and cutting it down. So the neckline on this is much higher since it's for a bodysuit. So I cut that into a scoop neck, and then we can also bring this to the length we want. So I'm going to cut this down quite a bit into the crop top shape. You'll also notice that this is still pretty baggy on me, so I'm going to take in the side seams. I'm also going to take in the sleeves too. Those also are fitting quite loosely. Now that I have this all fit and cut how I want it, I can do the yellow bias on the edges. So I will be cutting out some bias tape and making it myself. So with this white stretch fabric, white, it's yellow. So with this yellow stretch fabric, I'll be cutting out 3-inch wide strips, which then can be folded in half. And bias tape needs to be cut on the 45 degree so that it has a nice bend and it doesn't stick out awkwardly. Now for sewing the bias tape, I'm going to fold these 3-inch pieces in half, and then I'm just going to sew along the edge. This makes this long kind of bias tape tube, and then this tube can be attached like you would attach trim onto the end of the sleeves, the bottom of the crop top, and the neckline. Sewing along the edge again with a zigzag stitch. And then I'm also going to top stitch this down. This definitely helps the bias tape lay flat. And now the crop top is done and we can move on to the skirt. I'll be using this McCalls skirt pattern. it says learn to sew. So it is very easy, very simple. I'm going to, according to the pattern, just cut out the skirt layer. I'm going to shorten it a bit. I did not have a whole lot of fabric left at my disposal. If you would like, you can cut it out at the full length and then trim it later, whatever you are comfortable with. And I'm also going to cut out the waistband. Now I can sew the side seams of the skirt together. And just like the skirt, we can also sew both sides of the waistband together. So next we could attach the waistband. However, with this design, there are also little belt loops, and then she wears this yellow belt with it. So for that, I'm going to cut out a whole bunch of these little pieces of the blue fabric. And those pieces, they're going to be folded in half, and that seam is going to be sewn together. So now we have a whole bunch of little tubes. And then I'm going to flip those little tubes inside out with some difficulty. I'm going to flip them inside out. So now you should have all these little inside out blue tubes laying around. These are going to become our belt loops. Now in the pattern, it asks you to cut out the waistband on a fold. Now since we're going to have to add all of these little belt loops along the way, you should have your waistband separated, not on the fold. So now I have 5 of these, and I'm going to line them up around where I would want them on the waistband. So I'm going to sew one end and then flip it inside out. And now I have all of these tubes just kind of hanging off of that seam. And there's no real direction to them. They're just kind of there. So I would definitely like them to lay flat, especially so it's much easier to sew the next seam. So I'm going to top stitch all of those belt loops down, and this also kind of defines which is the outside and which is the inside of your waistband. And now we can finally sew the waistband to the skirt. So this is done just like you would without belt loops, just that seam around the skirt. And you do want to leave a gap in the seam so that you can thread in the elastic. And then I'm going to take a safety pin and I'm going to pin it through the end of that elastic. And that elastic can just be threaded through the waistband on this skirt. And once it's threaded through, I'm going to sew both ends of the elastic together, and then I can sew up that hole that I've left in the waistband. So I can just fold over the bottom edge of the skirt and sew it down into a nice hem. And now you have your Supergirl outfit complete. I have a separate tutorial for how I did the cape, so you can check that out if you would like. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment sections down below, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.